more than 4,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, where no sunlight has ever reached and the pressure would collapse anything not built to survive it. A research team lowered experimental chambers onto the seafloor of one of the most remote places on Earth. They expected to measure how much oxygen was being consumed. That is what every previous study in the deep ocean had measured. Oxygen goes down there. Life uses it. It does not come back. What the sensors recorded instead stopped the team cold. Oxygen levels were rising, not declining, rising, in total darkness, with no plants, no photosynthesis, no biological mechanism anyone had ever described or predicted for an environment like this. They checked the equipment. They ran the numbers again. They troubleshot for weeks, and eventually they arrived at a conclusion that forced the scientific community to rewrite one of its most fundamental assumptions about how life on this planet works. This is what they found, and why it changes everything. The zone nobody had properly explored. The Clarion-Clipperton Zone is a vast abyssal plain stretching 4.5 million square kilometers across the northeastern Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Mexico. That is an area larger than the continental United States. It sits between approximately 4,000 and 5,500 meters below the surface. The pressure at that depth is over 400 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. Almost nothing down there has been properly studied. The instruments capable of reaching it are expensive, difficult to operate, and limited in what they can observe. For most of the history of deep ocean science, researchers have relied on remote-operated vehicles tethered to ships, basic landers dropped to the seafloor, and camera systems with limited field of view. What they documented was consistently the same. A cold, dark, largely barren plain of sediment and mineral rock with occasional strange creatures drifting through the black water. Scattered across that plain in their billions are polymetallic nodules, potato-sized lumps of compressed mineral material, dark gray-black, rough-surfaced, lying loose on the sediment. Each one took millions of years to form, growing approximately 2 millimeters every million years. They are composed primarily of manganese and iron oxides, but also contain cobalt, nickel, copper, lithium, and rare earth elements, precisely the metals that the global EV battery industry needs in massive quantities. 16 companies currently hold mining exploration permits in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. The total mass of nodules in the zone is estimated to be sufficient to meet global demand for EV battery metals for decades. Equipment is being developed. Regulatory approvals are in motion at the International Seabed Authority. The plan, broadly, was to begin industrial-scale extraction of these nodules within years. The research team, led by Dr. Andrew Sweetman of the Scottish Association for Marine Science, was not studying mining directly. They were tasked with studying the ecology of the zone, measuring oxygen fluxes at the seafloor to understand how the deep-sea ecosystem functioned. This was baseline science, the kind of work done before major industrial decisions are made to establish what is there and how it operates. What they expected was straightforward. Oxygen reaches the deep ocean through slow circulation currents that carry surface water downward over centuries. Life at the seafloor consumes that oxygen. The experiment would measure the rate of consumption. Standard methodology. Well-understood outcomes. The signal that should not exist. The team deployed benthic chamber landers, instruments that descend to the seafloor, settle onto the sediment, and enclose a measured volume of seawater along with whatever is inside. Sediment, organisms, nodules, and the water immediately above them. The chambers then measure how oxygen levels change over 48 hours. In every previous study ever conducted at abyssal depths, oxygen declined. Life consumed it. The rate of decline told researchers how active the ecosystem was. In the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, oxygen increased. Over 2 days, levels rose to more than 3 times the background concentration. Not a slight elevation, not instrument drift. 3 times background. The signal was consistent across multiple deployments at multiple locations. Every check the team ran confirmed it. The oxygen was real. The seafloor was producing it. Jeff Marlowe, an assistant professor at Boston University and co-author of the study, described the team's response directly. They did extensive troubleshooting. They found that oxygen levels increased many more times following the initial measurement. Eventually, he said, they became convinced it was a real signal. The question was, what was producing it? Photosynthesis was impossible. There is no light below 200 meters, let alone at 4,000 meters. Biological oxygen production through photosynthesis requires sunlight and had never been the explanation for anything this deep. Whatever was generating this oxygen was doing it through a mechanism that no existing model predicted or described. Dr. Sweetman contacted Professor Franz Geiger, a chemistry researcher at Northwestern University, to explore possible explanations. Geiger had previously established that rust, when combined with salt water, generates electricity. The parallel was direct. The polymetallic nodules contain dense concentrations of metal ions distributed unevenly through their structure. That uneven distribution creates a separation of electrical charges, exactly the way a battery works. The nodules were functioning as geological batteries, and the voltage they generated was doing something extraordinary with the surrounding seawater. Sweetman shipped several pounds of nodules from the ocean floor to Geiger's laboratory at Northwestern. What they found in the lab confirmed what the seafloor sensors had recorded. The nodules were generating voltages of up to 0.95 volts on their surfaces. For context, just 1.5 volts, the output of a standard AA battery, is enough to split seawater into hydrogen and oxygen through a process called seawater electrolysis. The nodules were not quite reaching that threshold on their own, but in the dense, mineral-rich, high-pressure environment of the abyssal seafloor, the conditions appeared sufficient to drive the reaction. Oxygen was being produced in total darkness, 4 kilometers underwater, by geological processes operating in rocks that had been sitting on the seafloor for millions of years. The team called it dark oxygen. The study was published in Nature Geoscience on July 22, 2024. What it means for life on Earth. The scientific implications started cascading almost immediately after publication. Deep-sea ecosystems had already been understood to be stranger and more resilient than surface-world science predicted. Life clusters around hydrothermal vents in the total absence of sunlight, surviving on chemical energy rather than photosynthetic energy. Creatures have been found at depths and under pressures that should be incompatible with complex biology, but dark oxygen changes the framework further. If polymetallic nodules across the abyssal plains of the Pacific have been producing oxygen through seawater electrolysis for millions of years, then the deep ocean ecosystems living in and around those nodules have had access to a resource nobody accounted for. The faunal diversity in nodule-rich areas of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone is, according to Professor Geiger, higher than in the most diverse tropical rainforests. That richness may not be coincidental. It may be a direct consequence of a sustained geochemically produced oxygen supply that science had completely missed until 2024. Marine biologists who visited sites mined in the 1980s and 2016 and 2017, 30 years after the disturbance, found that not even bacteria had recovered in the mined areas. In unmined regions adjacent to them, life flourished. The reason those dead zones persist for decades remains unknown, but the discovery of dark oxygen adds a new variable to that mystery. If removing the nodules also removes the mechanism producing local oxygen, the dead zone may not be recovering because the oxygen source that sustained it is gone. The question that reaches beyond Earth. The discovery attracted immediate attention from astrobiologists for a reason that is both simple and staggering. Europa, the moon of Jupiter, has a vast ocean beneath a thick shell of ice. No sunlight penetrates, but it has a rocky, mineral-rich seafloor and liquid water in contact with it. If polymetallic nodules or analogous mineral formations on Europa's seafloor are generating electrical charge and splitting water molecules the same way they do in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, then Europa's ocean may contain oxygen produced entirely without sunlight. Enceladus, Saturn's moon, erupts geysers of water through its ice, suggesting a liquid ocean beneath. The same logic applies. Jeff Marlowe of Boston University, in commentary accompanying the study, noted directly that the fact oxygen can be made independently of the surface world has a lot of exciting implications for the distribution of animal life not only in Earth's oceans but potentially beyond our planet. The search for extraterrestrial life has long been constrained by the assumption that liquid water and sunlight were both required for complex biology. Dark oxygen removes sunlight from that equation. A mineral-rich seafloor and liquid water may be sufficient. That changes which moons and planets are worth looking at, and what we are looking for when we look. The collision with industry. The timing of the publication was not accidental. The study was announced simultaneously at the International Seabed Authority Council meetings in Kingston, Jamaica, where international regulators were negotiating the framework for deep-sea mining operations in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. 16 companies hold exploration permits in the zone. The nodules they plan to extract are the same nodules the study identified as producing dark oxygen. Professor Geiger stated it plainly in his commentary on the paper. The polymetallic nodules that produce this oxygen contain cobalt, nickel, copper, lithium, and manganese, all critical elements used in batteries. Several large-scale mining companies aim to extract these elements from the seafloor at depths of 10,000 to 20,000 feet. We need to rethink how to mine these materials so that we do not deplete the oxygen source for deep-sea life. The question the scientific community is now asking is one that industry has no current answer for. If we remove these nodules at industrial scale, do we shut off a geochemical oxygen-producing system that has been operating for millions of years? Do we destroy ecosystems that depend on it? Ecosystems whose full complexity we have only just begun to understand? Could we be eliminating the physical evidence that might teach us how life first survived on this planet, or how it might survive somewhere else in the solar system? The study has been scrutinized and contested. A 2025 paper in Frontiers in Marine Science raised questions about whether the dark oxygen signal has been independently replicated and noted that previous studies at nodule-rich sites in the Pacific consistently showed oxygen consumption rather than production. The scientific debate is ongoing, but the International Seabed Authority cited the discovery as a potential challenge to extraction plans and called for deeper independent research before proceeding. A team measuring oxygen consumption found oxygen production instead. In total darkness, 4 kilometers underwater, in rocks sitting on the seafloor for millions of years, it rewrote deep-sea science, raised questions about life beyond Earth, and put a direct collision course between one of the most significant geological discoveries of the decade and an industry already holding extraction permits. Subscribe for more.